Hi, everybody. I hope you're going really well. My name's Angela Williamson. I'm the Director of Blue Policy and Planning at the Blue Economy Cooperative Research Centre. I want to start by thanking you for your time. We're going to spend up to the next hour taking you through the Blue Economy Zone proposed Bass Strait Aquaculture Research Trial in Commonwealth waters. Prior to me introducing my colleagues that I have on screen and who'll be taking us through this proposal today, I just wanted to acknowledge the Palawa and Pakana people as the traditional owners upon the land that we work and we live. So I'm now going to introduce you to my colleague, Simon Wilcox.
Good afternoon. Yes, my name's Simon Wilcox. I work for the Blue Economy CRC. I am involved in managing the project and the preparation of the project that is the proposal for the aquaculture trial in Bass Strait.
Thank you very much, Simon. Sam, over to you.
Thanks, Ange. My name's Sam Ibbott, and I have a small consulting business based in Hobart. We've worked looking at human impacts on the marine environment through Bass Strait for about 30 years, and we work closely with the aquaculture industry elsewhere in Tasmania and a whole range of other government business enterprises, government agencies and private enterprise. So we've been engaged by the Blue Economy CRC to provide some advice and help them with their site selection and a monitoring program should the trial or when the trial proceeds.
Thank you so much, Sam and Simon, and I look forward to hearing from you as we go along. So we're going to spend the next couple of minutes going through what the trial is, where it's come from, what is proposed, and what that really looks like and what it means. We're currently in a consultation stage, and so part of this as well is providing information for people who want to have their say. I encourage everyone to have a look at our website where all the material I'm taking you through plus more is available. But let's start by why we're doing this. Next slide, please. Thank you. So back in 2019, when the Blue Economy CRC was established, which involved 44 participants at that time, committing to looking at really important ocean governance issues, including supporting the introduction of offshore aquaculture, moving further offshore into higher energy environment, looking at offshore wind, offshore ocean energy, and other new and emerging industries, at the same time of looking at who are the existing users, how does that relate to community and consumers, and also what does that mean for ocean governance and an integrated approach. So the Blue Economy CRC is now at year 5, and over that period of time, we've been working with our participants and other ocean users to better understand what the governance challenges are, what those industry challenges are, and what cultural license to operate and cultural and other licenses to operate and social license, what that all meant. So there's been a series of work looking at environment characteristics all over Australia. And one of the core parts of that was the identification of a Blue Economy Zone. The Blue Economy Zone is a new concept. It's something that sits within a research realm to inform and de-risk and share that risk of new and emerging activities coming to the play. So what we're going to take you through is what that looks like from an aquaculture perspective. So back 2019, you had a mandate from a research perspective. What was missing when it came to aquaculture in these waters, and what I'm talking about is Commonwealth waters, so from the 3 nautical mile mark out to 200 nautical miles, there actually was no governance arrangement. You could do fisheries, you could do shipping and a variety of other activities, but there actually was no governance arrangement, and there still is no governance arrangement for offshore aquaculture in those waters. So the government of the day was really interested in working with the Blue Economy CRC and our participants to understand what that could look like, starting with our research trial. This research trial had a variety of objectives up front that were really tasked to the Blue Economy CRC from the government. That included looking at operational feasibility and suitability of open ocean aquaculture in Commonwealth waters. The further offshore you go, what does that look like? Looking at assessing and examining the environmental conditions of a trial site and the surrounds to monitor and mitigate impacts on the environment and wildlife, to assess the financial and economic viability of sustainable aquaculture in Commonwealth waters and benefits for local communities in those adjacent areas, to assess the impacts of other marine users. We are at a spot where there are other people already operating, and we really need to be mindful of that in the intersection of this activity and those users. To understand and monitor community sentiment. There's a variety of views from supporting to not supporting of aquaculture around Australia, New Zealand and the world. And we operate predominantly in Australia, but we're also looking at these questions in New Zealand as well. And then one of the pieces here that's really critical is developing and assessing models for future governance of aquaculture in those Commonwealth waters, and looking at really important things like workplace safety frameworks. Next slide, please. So with that in mind, the CRC, I guess, was provided some space, and I'll take you through that in a moment, through an MOU, an exchange of I guess, governance arrangements between the federal government, who has oversight of this area, with the state government through a fisheries management arrangement. So this area in Bass Strait that I'll take you through meant that the federal government, the Commonwealth government, has worked with the Tasmanian government to provide us that base to undertake that trial. So with an area of interest, we started thinking about, well, how do you answer those questions, those objectives? So the outcomes and outputs for us really sat around creating Australia's first in-water research trial and demonstration. In Europe, there are these areas where you can trial offshore wind, research, aquaculture, and we just don't have those in Australia. So this is the first one of those. We committed to creating a handbook of open ocean aquaculture, a blueprint of future farms, which would include our annual research trial outcomes, which was something that was specified by the governments through the Memorandum of Understanding. A synthesis of the full research trial findings at the conclusion of the project as well. So in addition to the annuals, the full package. Compilation of best practice learnings so that can be shared for industry, other users and community and government. A smart farming database, because we really want to go further. We want to push things into more precision farming and see what needs to be done to better operate in this kind of environment with the species, the multi-species we're looking at. Looking at an offshore high energy farm carbon footprint assessment. There's a number of farms across Australia in the ocean estate that have undertaken their carbon assessments, the carbon emission assessments. So we're using this as a starting point. How do you know from day one what's going on? Health and safety framework, as well as an advisory on future governance models for aquaculture in Commonwealth waters. And there's a couple of different models that could look like, as has been set within national aquaculture strategies, ranging from Commonwealth to the adjacent jurisdiction taking a role to a hybrid. This also allows us to be what the Blue Economy CRC is best, and that's undertake a strong research portfolio with reports and communication material and webinars like this to better understand what's going on. Next slide, please. So here we are. Here's what we're all come for. What I've got in front of me here is a map. This shows the waters north of Burnie. The blue line here off the coast is 3 nautical miles. So between that blue line and the coast is Tasmanian waters, overseen by the Tasmanian government. The black rectangle that sits just north of that is an area through a fisheries arrangement area that has been provided through the offshore constitutional settlement from the federal government or the state government to oversee and regulate and permit research activities. So that was consulted on back in 2022 by the Department of, at the time, Agriculture, Water and Environment. And there was a strong consultation process on that particular rectangle there. Within the rectangle, you can see 2 different boxes. The red rectangle that's upright is an original trial site, an initial trial site provided through that consultation. And then the rectangle on the side that's yellow is a preferred trial site that Sam will take us through in a moment. So what I really wanted to show here more than anything is the proposed trial site is 12 kilometres north of Burnie. The area is about 105 hectares. It will be housing a 6-bay mooring grid, which I'll take you through shortly, for multi-species of finfish. We're looking at Tasmanian Atlantic salmon and kingfish. Be 2 pens that would be active for finfish production. Each of those pens would stock 15,000 fish each, 15. And the rest of the mooring, which we'll take you through shortly, will allow for a submersible pen, for seaweed, for shellfish, and co-location potentially of renewable energy generation. Next slide, please. This process in identifying from the red to the yellow involved getting advice from Sam. So Sam, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Ange. Hello, everyone. So prior to my involvement, some of the Blue Economy partners have done a much broader scoping look through Bass Strait. So not just off Burnie, but from right over near Table Cape to across near Devonport, and chosen this area to pursue the trial site. As part of that initial work, there was a lot of Met Ocean work done. So there was information on wave heights, wave directions, wind speeds, currents, and a whole range of broad information to hone in on what's the red rectangle, so the initial site. We were engaged at that point to provide some more specialised advice, I guess, and research around that proposed trial site. And we went out and did a range of things which you would sort of expect. So we did some multi-beam mapping of that area and some sub-bottom profiling, and also a range of video drops. And what we discovered was that at the initial site, which is the sort of southern of those two, there were patches of high profile or low profile reef, sponge gardens. There was quite a bit of algae and fish life. And we determined that that's not an appropriate habitat to be doing the trial adjacent to. So we broadened our search area to the northern of these two, or the blue area with the yellow rectangle, and that's much deeper. It's further offshore, so it'd be take longer to travel there. You know, there's bigger expense in terms of fuel to travel back and forward from the shore, but very importantly, it gave us a lot more confidence about having the site in the right location, because to answer the questions that we need to answer, we need to make sure that the site is appropriately selected. And you can see from the 2 images on the right that offshore site is predominantly soft sediment. It's silts and soft sediment, whereas the shallower site inshore had a range of those sort of reef communities, which we deemed not appropriate to put the trial next to. So once we'll go next slide, please. Once we had determined the offshore site was an appropriate site, we applied the information from the wave and current collections that have been done using acoustic Doppler current profilers mounted on the seabed and recording data for a year. We got the multi-beam bathymetry, which is very fine scale mapping data, sub-bottom profiling to make sure that the sediments are quite deep or adequately deep. We looked at the sediment characteristics, and I'll come back to that, why that's important. The infaunal communities, which are the little beasties that live in the sediment, so the worms and echinoderms and different animals that are responsible for bioturbating or stirring up the sediments. And we did a whole lot of video drops to characterise what's on the seabed there. Now, one of the things that we discovered in our research is that the rocky reef community that's a bit shallower seems to be the depositional zone from a glacier, which at a different time and a different sea level was scouring along the shoreline there and moved out to about 45 metres deep, or what's now 45 metres deep, and depositing all those rocks there. But once we moved beyond that, we're onto soft sediment, really all the way from about the 50-metre contour right across Bass Strait till you're at 50 metres on the Victorian coastline. And that's consistent with information that we found doing other marine surveys in the area, so Project Marinus cable or Basslink cable, or some of the spoil ground monitoring for sea dumping of dredging when some of the ports have needed to be dredged. So we've built up a really good understanding of what's in Bass Strait. But the other thing that we found really interesting was, over my 30 years of monitoring sites along Bass Strait and different industries, a lot of the industry along the north coast has shut up and gone into decline, and things like Tyoxide or Australian Pulp and Paper Mill used to have outfalls to Bass Strait, and you can see the map on the right. We found this historical sort of data that this was from the Northwest Acid Plant, where they would take calcite offshore and dump it on these locations, which isn't far from where the trial site is. So that led us to two things. We wanted to make sure that the sediments weren't contaminated and it was suitable for a trial site. So we did a lot of sediment testing to make sure that there were no historical legacy issues around contamination. But it also led us to get which is really, really clear, an obvious understanding that during that time, since those industries have shut down, the marine environment in Bass Strait has recovered a lot. The water quality has improved, and the community living all along the coast has responded to that, and they have a much more focus on recreational activities, swimming, kayaking, surf clubs, sailing clubs, kayak clubs, and fishing, things like that. And they're really proud of that. So one of the things that we've been very conscious of is making sure that the trial fits in and aligns closely with those community sentiments, that there's a sense of pride around the marine environment in that area. So the learnings, I guess, a little bit for us came from understanding the historical uses and the historical users of this area, because a lot of this data, you can't just go to Google and look it up. It's been written pre-internet. So some of the data sources that we've found have been fascinating to look at as well. So we've overlaid the historical with the contemporary of what's there now, and feel we have a really good understanding of the trial site.
Thank you so much, Sam. And I think that's such an important piece to touch on, which is operating in an area that has historical use, but at the same time hasn't had any use in the context of what we're looking at, has actually meant that we've had to look at things differently. We've had to understand the broader system. You touched on the marine values piece, and we've had to understand really what matters to other ocean users and community in this area. So we need to be really mindful of that with this particular research trial. Next slide, please. So the area that we touched on here, what we're proposing to put forward as part of the trial, which is our infrastructure, really is a 6 pen bay grid. Of this 6 pen bay grid, we would have 2 pens for finfish farming, as I touched on, and 2 pens would be available for husbandry purposes as needs be. And then we'd have a 2 pen bay area that would be made available for submersible pens. There is no submersible pen use in Australia at this point, so it really does become something novel that we can test and look at the gear durability alongside looking at fish welfare, husbandry, and whether the environment out in this area, what it means and what's different. So this area, we talk about Bass Strait as being, it's not warm and it's not cool. It has a particular temperature gradient within it. It's stratified. And so understanding how our gear operates in this area for these fish is going to be really interesting. What we're proposing to have is ideally a pen circumference of 120 with a depth of 20 meters as well. So this is a little bit different to the pens that you would see in other operations of the rest of the finfish estate around Australia. A bit smaller, a bit deeper, and that's really because this, as Sam touched on, this is the deepest site in Australia, if not in Australia, New Zealand, and many other places as well. So it's quite interesting and allows us to look at things differently. Next slide, please. So touched on there, 2 different species that are going to be looked at, not in the same pen. Pen 1 will be 15,000 Tasmanian Atlantic salmon. Pen 2 is 15,000 kingfish, and they are certainly smaller numbers than commercial operations. However, we are still looking at this from a commercial learning as well as a research learning, as well as a governance learning, of course. Next slide, please. So quite often people with something new in the area are really interested in, well, what does that mean? Yes, you're off further oversight, over the horizon in many cases. Get Simon to touch on that in a minute. But what does that vessel movement look like? So we've articulated that we will have a daily transition from the corridor from Port of Burnie out to our site, which is a FarmWorks vessel. Weekly, there'll be a dive boat, potentially the same vessel. There is a works barge that has been identified and will be supporting the operation, and it will provide fortnightly bathing support for the fish. There's a potential for a use of a wellboat, and we've certainly put that within our approval, permit approval material. That doesn't necessarily mean we'll be actually undertaking that. But understanding what the footprint is, what that traffic looks like, is a really, really critical piece in the good neighbour approach to operations. Simon, before I moved on, I just wanted to ask you or invite you to just give a little summary on the visual aspect from, let's say, on Burnie Beach. What does that look like?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ange. So there'll be a couple of pens out there side by side. The pens are approximately 60 metres across. So when you've got them side by side and a bit of space between them, 40 metres across each. So when you've got them side by side and the space between them, you're probably looking at about 100-metre wide object that would be presenting in the view field from the shore. We've had some visual modelling done, and that looks at the curvature of the Earth and takes into account the distance from shore. If you're on the foreshore at Burnie, looking out to where the pens would be at a distance of 12.5 kilometres, they're actually over the horizon. You can't see them. If you go inland a little bit from Burnie and up into the hillside suburbs, so you might get up to 100 metres. There's a lookout just at the back of Burnie, which has an elevation of around 95 metres. You will be able to see them visually, but they'll be fairly small, and we have some images available. Should anyone be interested, that they're a mock-up, but they show what from that lookout vantage point, what you would see out at that, and from there it's probably about 14 kilometres offshore, and there's a ship in that photo montage for scale, and what it shows is that it's a very unobtrusive. You can see it if you look for it, but it'll be very unobtrusive.
Thanks, Simon. I really appreciate that. We'll go to the next slide, please. Sam, I might get you to take us through the monitoring, because you've certainly helped support us with this permit submission process, both under the EPBC and through the state process, in preempting what we anticipate the most appropriate monitoring program would look like. And while this is still to be assessed and signed off or value added, thought it would be great if you could share some of your experiences and your thinking behind monitoring, because environment characteristics and healthy system has certainly been front of mind for a lot of the people that we've spoken to date in this particular region.
Okay, to try and download my brain with a lot of information in it in a short space of time, I'll explain it a bit like this. I think with a finfish aquaculture farm, there are two types of emissions that we think would come from that farm. One we call the soluble emissions, which is things like ammonia, carbon dioxide, which are excreted through the gills, and they have the potential and impact on water quality. And we know that happens, and that's very well studied in Tasmania and all around the globe, anywhere that there's finfish aquaculture. And we know that there's some dissolved nutrients become a little bit elevated adjacent to the pens. And so that's one of the sites of impact that we think would be worth monitoring and understanding, because the tidal range off Burnie is around 3 to 3.2 metres, maybe a bit bigger on the spring tide, which means that every 6 hours, if you look at the entirety of the surface of the ocean and add 3 metres and then take 3 metres of height off, it's an enormous volume of water that's flushing through Bass Strait. As Ange said, this isn't commercial densities of fish. It's quite low densities compared to a commercial lease. But nevertheless, we'd like to understand the impacts on water quality. The other component is what we call particulate emissions, which might be some fecal material or uneaten feed pellets that have dropped through the pen inadvertently. And so they tend to fall to the seabed. And we know also that they have an impact on the sediments down there. So they will impact the biota, the infaunal communities, and some of the things called the sulfides or the redox potential. And we know that elsewhere, that occurs within the lease boundary. There's a regulation within Tasmanian aquaculture, which obviously this isn't. This is a trial, but there's a regulation that 35 metres outside the lease boundary, there can't be any deleterious effects to the sediment. In this instance, given the relatively small scale of the lease, of the trial, and the depth of the lease and the amount of water movement moving through, I'm very much of the opinion that anything we can detect will be quite small and negligible. But they're likely to be the things which are regulated. So to make sure that if there is an impact, it's retained within the lease boundary, and that we understand the scale or the extent of any impact on the water quality that's moving through the lease. In addition to that, because this is a trial, there's a fantastic opportunity to put a whole lot of other things in which might not be related to the regulation of the trial, but would be really nice things to know, and much would help aquaculture in general, but it certainly help answer questions that people have concerns around, and help hopefully answer questions around production and animal interactions. So we've proposed putting perhaps some live feed cameras on the pens. We can look at interactions with seabirds and perhaps seal interactions, perhaps even cameras on the bottom, which comes with a problem of biofouling, but to say that there is a transparent piece around what's happening it's not just a report that's a pretty bland report, but people can actually see what's going on. That's been requested at one of the community consultation sessions, but it's also something that we've considered as a useful part of the monitoring plan. Equally, we know Bass Strait to be quite periodically a rough piece of water. So putting some load sensors and cells on the equipment and understanding how well the anchoring equipment is holding, what types of stresses the ropes and the pens are undergoing during extreme weather events, and how they wear and through time. So that's going to be another piece of the trial, which is really, really important. So understanding the equipment and the engineering component. So there's quite a lot that goes into it. And there's an opportunity for people to have their say if they have a particular interest in one or more aspects of the trial, to build in some, I guess, additional monitoring components, because we are really keen to learn. We need to ask the right questions at the beginning, and then hopefully over the course of the trial, we'll get the answers which we can share. And they might be questions which the community have got, as well as the questions that the aquaculture companies have got.
Thank you so much, Sam. And I think that's a really important point, is while this research trial certainly is about looking at maybe a transitioning, new emerging industry in new space, what it is also doing is allowing us to look across existing users and existing values and ask questions around what else is happening in that area. And we will touch on later how to have your say and how to contribute. Our Have Your Say survey certainly provides space to also tell us what matters to you, what marine values you're interested in, so that we can understand that in the context of monitoring. And while this has the monitoring focus on in water and in the environment we're operating, we will also be supplementing that with some community related work, looking at community sentiment and understanding what matters to people in this particular region too. Next slide, please. So I just touched on then around the community aspect. The trial itself does have a very strong governance arrangement. There's proposed governance arrangement, much more details of information on our website, which we'll touch on shortly. But we do have a variety of groups that we have established or in the process of establishing that we hope will bring different perspectives to the table and ask those different questions, ranging from our trial research and operations working group, which includes some of our funders like FRDC, some of the Blue Economy CRC participants, and the three of us, for example, and some of our colleagues. Also got a research and technical advisory group who are looking above the operational trial per se and looking at it more broadly in that context of, well, what matters and what do we need to know and what has relevance for aquaculture right around Australia beyond the Bass Strait trial, because this is a matter that influences the whole EEZ around Australia. But also looking at others who are interested in understanding, well, what are the implications of operating further offshore? If I care about wildlife, if I'm in retail, if I'm safety, or if I'm an engineer. This process, because it is a research trial, we've been working with government representatives across the federal government space who already are operating or administering activities in that region, like the Department of Agriculture, Forestry, Fisheries, the Australian Marine Safety Authority, Australian Fisheries Management Authority, and then when it comes to Tasmania as well, the Natural Resource Environment Tasmania, Department, the old DPIPWI, to really understand, again, what their interest is, what their experiences are. Blue Economy CRC already has a strong governance arrangement for our research, so we're tapping in on that, capturing our management team, our research leadership team across our 5 programs of work, from engineering through to governance, and our scientific advisory committee as well. But what we really wanted to make sure everyone was aware of is we are about to run a expression of interest process for a community advisory group. So this will be calling out for, this process will call out for skills and experiences. We're looking for an independent chair, local council representative, Indigenous representative. Project will have a cultural navigator as well, fisheries peak representative, recreational peak representative, an aquaculture peak representative, and we're encouraging an environmental non-government organisation to also take on a role here. We'll provide secretariat from the team here, and we'll also be bringing in one of our participants, Griffith University, and their ethics team, and they've been doing quite a lot of work on ethics in growing the blue economy. We're open, we'll be reviewing that to see whether there are other representatives that should be part of this group. It will be around for the course of the project, that 3 years. It will be provided inner sanctum access to what's happening. So think on water, think about where the fish are farmed from, a control centre as well. So having a look at that, ability to dig into all the research areas across engineering, wildlife, the fish themselves, what that all looks like, and then also be able to ask questions and put concepts back as well, so that we know that we're calibrating with what matters in the community as well. Next slide, please. So we are in the process of our Have Your Say. This does close at 5 p.m. on the 30th of September. And we've got a number of ways people can join the conversation, ranging from coffee drop-ins and our community meetings and sessions, which are held at Burnie Surf Lifesaving Club up in Burnie. Simon, Sam and myself will be back there on Monday, the 16th of September, and Tuesday, the 17th of September. So I encourage anyone who's living up there, who's got a question, to drop by. We're also doing sessions like this, and there's another one scheduled for next week. And if there is needs be, we'll do another one the following week as well. We're certainly open to sharing our experiences, our aspirations, and how we found ourselves to where we are today and what it looks like ahead. We're consulting on 2 particular documents. One is the extended project description, and the other is the trial site. So there are 2 particular documents on our website, and you can click on those and jump in, and you'll be able to see what our activity is and what our site is. And we've got some Have Your Say surveys that allows you to comment on both, or one part or the other. And as I said, that's available until the 30th of September. Next slide, please. Encourage you all, if you've got phones with you, to flick them up and use this QR code, and you'll be able to see our Bass Strait Blue Economy Zone website. This page has been available for the last 2 years, and we've just recently updated it a fortnight or so ago to be able to capture what this information is, what all the associated reports are, to support both the consideration through the Environment Protection Biodiversity Conservation Act process, which is a part of our commitment to the federal government to undertake this research, which looks at impacts against matters of national environmental significance, and then also our consultation and the various material that will support our permit application with the Tasmanian government. So I'm mindful that we've still got a bit of time up our sleeves. And so the way that these webinars work is we encourage you to jump onto the Q&A piece. And if you've got any questions for Simon, Sam, or myself, please type them in and we will go through each of them. So I'm just going to give you a minute or so to have a think and pop that in. And while I'm doing that, I'm just going to jump to Sam really quickly. Sam, what I'd really like you to have a think about and let us know while people are having a think about if there are any questions, is do you want to just take us through more broadly your experience and observations up in this area? You've touched on it earlier. It's got a strong history. You've been with us with our consultation to date with community. Can you tell us what's special about up here?
Okay. Look, Bass Strait's unusual in that it's a mix of two water bodies, I guess. It has Eastern Bass Strait has a little influence from the East Australian Current, which is a warm, salty, and nutrient poor water mass. And then if you move further to the west of King Island, off the coast of Victoria, really, there's an upwelling there called the Bonnie Upwelling, which is quite cold. It's slightly less salty, and it's got quite a lot of nutrients. So we see a gradient in Bass Strait in the ecology quite a lot. And when you look around Tasmania, around the coast, it's broken into a range of different bioregions. And the one up in Bass Strait is called the Bogues bioregion. And it often has, which I think is great, and there's a story behind that, as you can imagine. But there's often it has quite depauperate nutrients, really. So often where there is a nutrient source, so for example, around a sewage outfall or around a seal colony or around a river mouth, is where those elevated nutrients allow a slightly more complex algal community to live. And with that, obviously, comes the more complex fish communities as well. So it's an area, especially the bit we're talking about at the moment, say from Wynyard through to Devonport, where historically there has been a lot of heavy industry, and people from that area that are familiar with it, and they're old enough to recall, Tioxide put out a range of metal oxides through an outfall which frothed up, and they discoloured the water and made it reasonably unpleasant, and it wasn't an area that was used for recreating or fishing or anything like that much for a number of years. But really in the late 80s, that was all discontinued, and over the last 30 years, we've seen significant improvement in the water quality and improvement in the biodiversity along the coastline. And the recreational fishers are certainly talking up things like Bass Strait barrels, so the bluefin tuna fishery returning to Bass Strait. And there are other fishers in the area that are very passionate around the whiting fishery, and King George whiting being such a highly sought after recreational and commercial species is now picking up in numbers as well. So we're very conscious of all of those community observations and my observations and the data. And so we're really trying hard to make sure that this trial fits in nicely with the existing users and the community, because we'd like the information to be transparent, and that's important because it's an opportunity. Aquaculture is a bit foreign, I guess. It's not on the North Coast. It's the first time that there's been something proposed up there, and it's an opportunity to bring the community along and hopefully answer their questions at the same time as answering some of the commercial questions.
Thank you, Sam. That's really helpful. And I think it's such an interesting perspective of something like this when your trial has a local element, but you have an application right across Australia. It's always interesting to get that regional perspective. Simon, I was going to ask as well if you could just take us through. You joined the team about 3 to 4 months ago. You have been able to have a look at all the material that has been pulled together to help support those permit application processes. Is there anything from your perspective that you think is valuable for our listeners to better understand when they hopefully jump online and have a look at that wealth of material there? I don't think I can show it in front of me because of the backgrounds, but if you put them all together, you end up with like a book that is roughly like this thick, and it's all kind of put together that way. How do you help people navigate how to read this material, given what matters most to them?
Yeah, thanks, Ange. We've certainly spent a lot of time doing work in the Bass Strait area that the trial is proposed to understand a whole range of parameters, and we've got reports that talk about how wildlife will be managed, how biosecurity will be managed. We've already talked about, but we've got the report there that proposes how monitoring will occur. We also have some of the background reports that talk about the broader site characterisation that Sam talked us through, and another report that talks about, which is one of Sam's reports, that talks about what the actual proposed trial site itself looks like. So a lot of information in that regard. There's another report that another consultant has prepared for the blue economy, which is about considering potential impacts on what we call matters of national environmental significance. So they are animals that are and plants and values that are recognised or listed under the Environmental Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act, which is a piece of Commonwealth legislation. So there's a great piece of information there that people can look at that talks about what risks do or don't exist for certain species of seabirds like albatrosses and marine mammals such as seals and whales. There's about 10 attachments in all covering that whole range of information. They're all very, very obviously labelled, so you should be able to fairly easily hone in on what you're interested in. If you go on our website, as Andrew said, you can see that information there. We've also got a couple of overarching documents that are a bit easier reading, perhaps. They talk about the proposal for the trial itself, and so you get a good understanding by reading that about exactly where the trial site is and why it's being conducted, why it's proposed, and how it will work and so forth. So yeah, there's something, I think, in that suite of information for everyone and anyone who is interested, and we've put it all there on the website to make sure that everyone is as informed as possible. One of the things we've sort of touched on, but perhaps not emphasised, is that this is a research trial and it's about collecting information to understand what finfish aquaculture might mean for the environment, what it might mean for the community. But equally important to answering those questions is making sure that the findings is available. We have a commitment here at the Blue Economy to be very transparent in what we're doing, which is why all that information's on the website, but also very important that we share, and we're committed to sharing the findings as they emerge, not just at the end of the process, not just as what happens in a reporting that might come out in a couple of years' time, but to bring people along, provide access to that information right throughout the trial. So that there'll be a range of mechanisms. Sam's talked about the idea of having some cameras out there, but our intention is to make sure that as information is amassed, that we give everyone access to that. There's also the community group that Ange outlined that is that'll have like almost an inner sanctum access, if you like. So we want to make sure that people can have a lot of confidence in the integrity of what we're doing and how we're doing it, and that everybody gets an opportunity to learn from the research. And in that regard, it's an opportunity right now for people to make sure that we understand what some of their concerns are, or what some of the things that they do want to learn, and we can build that in and do our best to answer that through as we build the architecture of the trial itself.
Thank you, Simon. I think that's really great. And I note we have no questions, but I'm just going to pop it out there as well. If people are sitting there going, is this just finfish? Through the Blue Economy CRC, we've had a number of people contact us with interest of offshore operations right around Australia in the context of potentially finfish up in the Gulf, Carpentaria, opportunities using potentially submersible pens and knowing that there's a lot of risk associated with that. So, you know, a real interest in what our learnings are here. We've had interest in seaweed farms or potential seaweed farms. There is no seaweed farm at scale and certainly not in Commonwealth waters. There's been a lot of complexities in the different jurisdictions at looking at seaweed. So that's been another area of interest from some of our participants and friends of the Blue Economy CRC. And also looking at mussels in sort of like off New South Wales coast, out into Commonwealth waters there as well, in areas where species like that can really grab nutrients. We are also looking at, for example, possibility of co-location of regenerative aquaculture alongside offshore wind arrays, and the ability to look at if an area or a space is being restricted in its use for certain activities, how can we get other advantages for nature or for food from that perspective? And that's a model that you're seeing in play in Europe at the moment. So we do have a question. So Oscar, hi Oscar, lovely to see you. Thank you very much for joining us. Very excited about what you and your crew work on. You've asked, is there scope for aquaculture service technology to be trialled alongside pens, something like wave-powered pumps? So what I wanted to just answer there is there most definitely is potential for things like that. We have a group that will be looking at all of these research opportunities, these add-on research opportunities at the end of October. And so I will pop that into the mix there as part of that conversation, and that sounds fantastic. And real big fan of what you're up to, and I'm really interested to see what we can do in that space, if possible. Yeah, absolutely. That would need to be captured in some of our permit applications in the state process potentially, but it would be really good to look at what things can happen alongside here. Absolutely. So thanks, Oscar, and thank you very much for joining us. Fantastic. Okay, well, I'm going to close this out. Thank you very much. If you've got any questions following up from this, please contact the CRC, jump onto this, have your say if you would like to participate. Even if you think that you've got you're supportive and it's just business as usual, what would be really fantastic is if you still participate and put forward your views. And I can just see that there is another question. Thank you very much for saying that this is a fantastic presentation. I hope you can tell that the team are really proud and really excited about this. It's great when Tasmania does something first, and it's great. The three of us have all studied fisheries in the Tasmanian academic system. We've all worked for various fisheries and aquaculture government and companies or our own companies. And so this is something that's really meaningful for all of us. So your question is, so the pen that's going to be used at Bass Strait is one specifically designed for offshore. So we've been quite fortunate to be working with some of our participants in their Storm Bay operations and really understanding the ability of those particular systems, and then learning off the back of that, have been also monitoring the area in Bass Strait that we're looking to operate in for the last number of years to have a look at what those characteristics are and make some comparisons and determine what adjustments might be needed. While it is definitely about taking a model that is in play in a very rough environment in Australia already and then taking it even further. Yes, it's in a different direction, but that's most definitely the intent. But we've also been working on things like new collar ties for the equipment and things like that, which really allow us to make some small adjustments as well as some big adjustments associated with the operations. But it has been tested, but not tested in that location. Our gear is going through a process of being assessed under the Norwegian standards. And having an independent review of that assessment as well, which will help us ensure that the site is suitable. The gear is suitable, to that site because it is, in that 50+ meters to 60 meters depth. Our mooring areas are going to be larger, and that's why that area is a little bit larger. So that's where that is. Thank you. I've been asked, how will this trial site affect offshore yacht racing events? So as part of this consultation, we've needed to work with AMSA, so in the Australia context, in the Commonwealth waters context, MAST in the Tasmanian context, and then also with TasPorts to really understand who else is operating in this area and what does that look like. Through the preliminary information that has been provided back to us through that process and through those conversations, there hasn't been a direct overlap per se. As part of our consultation, we've contacted various clubs to be able to better understand their feelings, their suggestions, or their ideas, and see whether there are, or concerns, and to see if there is any kind of overlap. But the information that's been provided to us at this point, based on the area and the size, is that there won't be necessarily that kind of intersection. Our area will be marked out with corner markers in accordance with AMSA and mast expectations. There will be a notice to mariners, and we'll be doing quite a lot of consultation over that process to make sure that there is visibility of this particular area.
And I might also just add to that. So those marking requirements are sort of national standard. They'll be highly visible during the day, but they'll also be lit at night. The other conversation that's live at the moment, but is something that we're certainly considering, is it's a conversation we've been having with Marine and Safety Tasmania about putting virtual markers on as well. And so for those of you who have navigation equipment on boats, you'll be familiar with something called AIS. Sam might tell me what that stands for if you need to know, but it's basically it means that if you're out in your boat on your plotter, your chart plotter, it will something that's got an AIS beacon on it shows up, and it gives you the information about that object as well. So traditionally, it's used for being able to see other boating traffic, and you can see which direction those boats are moving and how fast they're going and so forth. In this context, it could be a really interesting opportunity to trial it on a static structure, and people would see that on their navigation equipment, and be able to get all the information about what it was and how big it is and that sort of stuff.
Fantastic. Sam, anything you wanted to add at this stage?
No, only I guess that offshore yacht racing events, I guess I've been fortunate enough to participate in a number over the years, and sort of 3 Sydney Hobarts as a navigator as well. And so, yeah, you're right, Ange, all of that information, the notice to mariners, this would become, it's a trial, would be in place in the water for less than 3 years. However, during that time, I guess you would treat it as a fixed obstruction, the same as you might an island or a breakwater or anything else that's on your chart. So there'd be an opportunity to use that as you could race from Burnie or Devonport out around the lease markers and back to Devonport. So there's a race in the south of the state we have called the Two Capes race, which is just around virtual marks.
Fantastic. Okay. Well, I'm going to thank everyone again for their time. Oh, wait, another question. What methods are going to be used to better understand fish performance towards the end of the Bass Strait trial? Normal weight and length measurements, or any specific cutting edge technology? Great question, and a very live question for us and the team at the moment. We're in a conversation with trying to put our commercial participants and our research participants and retail and consumers in the same space to have a think about some of these aspects. We are also going through an ethics approval, which needs to happen to be able to make this trial actually happen, in addition to the permit processes. And so I am going to say watch this space on that one. And I know that's probably not the answer you want at the moment, but we will be continuing to add FAQs to our website. And we'll do a blast out to everyone on this email group who have participated today, and let you know when that's up there. So more information to come. The benefits of doing a research trial is you do get to do cutting edge, and our team certainly has an appetite to do more, do better, do different, do the same, and sort of put that all together into something that's really appropriate for a research trial like this. So great question. Love that. We'll add it to the list. Okay. Off the back of that, Sam and Simon, huge thanks to you. To our listeners, I'm so proud that you stayed on for the whole time. So huge thanks for that as well. As I said, we've got another one next week if you want to join us again, or if you've got any questions. There's an Ocean Ambition email on our website, which comes through to myself and Simon. And then there is also the Have Your Say. Please go and fill that out and tell us what matters to you and what you'd like to see here. Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks, team.
Thanks, everybody.